In this video, we're going to install MySQL using the program that we downloaded, the file that we downloaded in the last video, MySQL Installer Community. 8.0.32.0 is the version we're on right now. My mouse highlighter doesn't like to work with this program, so it is currently turned off. So I'm going to double click that. It asks me if I want to make changes to my device. Yes, we want that to happen. It will be blanked out, so you won't see that in the video, but I did answer yes to that. So ideally, this developer default would work great. It requires that you have Visual Studio installed on your computer, and you may not have Visual Studio, or you may not have the right version installed. But other than that, it's got all of the things that we want to install. So that would be an ideal one to use. But because I know I'm going to have a problem with Visual Studio, I am going to go down here to Custom. I'm going to hit Next, and you see that there's nothing to be installed here. I can go through and select them all manually, and I could do that, but I'm going to show you a little trick that you don't have to use. I'm going to pick that developer default. I'm going to hit Next. Okay, now it tells me that there's that problem with Visual Studio. So I'm going to go back, and now when I click Custom, it's going to give me all the things it was going to install. So I click Custom. This is the things it was going to install, but it knew that I had a problem with Visual Studio. So I'm going to click on that and get rid of it. I am not going to install the tools for Visual Studio. You can do that if you have Visual Studio installed. Take the default, see if it works. But I know in this case I don't, and I don't want to install it. The rest of these I'm going to use. We want MySQL Server. We want the server program. The Workbench is a GUI for managing the server, and we want to use that. Shell is the command line interface to manage the server, and you may want that at some point. We want the router. We want all these connectors, although sometimes there's issue with those, which is why we downloaded a manual connector. So we'll look and see how those work. We'll take the connectors. We'll take the documentation, and we definitely want the samples and examples because we're going to use one of the databases they have built in to test our application when we get it running. So those are the things I am choosing to install. I would suggest that you do something very similar and pick those exact choices. And I'm going to hit Next. And it tells me they're ready to install. So I'm going to hit Execute and let them install, and it will take a little while. So I am going to pause the video while those complete installing. All right, with the full version that I had downloaded, that only took a few minutes to run. So all the items have been installed, so I'm going to click Next. And we're going to go through a configuration wizard for each of the products that we installed. We can cancel at any point, but we're going to go ahead and do this. All right, so we're going to do a development computer. That's fine. Our connectivity, we're going to connect through TCP/IP on port 3306. That is the default. And if you want, I am taking the defaults on this. We also want to open our Windows Firewall port for network access. We're going to be accessing this locally, and we're only going to give users permission to access it locally, meaning the program we run is going to access it on the computer that the server's running on. They're going to be one and the same. So we're not going to open it up so people can access our database remotely. We don't need it for this example. However, we could turn it on and allow other computers to access our database if we wanted to. So we'll go ahead and leave these defaults here. We want to use strong password encryption for authentication. That's just good practice. We don't need to worry about MySQL 5 compatibility for what we're doing. So we will take the good encryption. Okay, now this is very important. You need to set a root password for your server, and this is the God password. This is anybody with this password can do anything to your server that they want to do. So this is one of those passwords that you want to keep very safe. You don't want to share it with anybody, and you don't want to use it on a day-to-day basis. Usually you want to set up a separate account for you, even if you're the administrator. Use a separate account with just the features that you need, because it's just a little bit safer than using the root password for everything. And then you would still have the root password available if you need to get in. So for your day-to-day work, have a different account. Don't always use the root. But we need to do a root. So I am going to say, I'm going to use SQL 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm telling you that because this computer is going to be set up with this. I'm going to do this installation, and I am going to delete it. Obviously, I would never use a weak password in a real environment. And I would never write it down. But for our purposes, for teaching, I am going to use that. Okay. We can create user accounts if we want right here and assign roles to users, but I'm not going to do that. I'll show you how to do a user account later. Configure MySQL as a Windows service. We want to keep those defaults. We'll run it as a standard system account, which is recommended for most scenarios, so we're not really changing anything here. And then we can change permission by updating permissions of the folders where the data is kept for our server. We'll grant full access. We'll leave the default there for that. And then here's the steps it's going to take to apply those configurations. And we'll just tell it to go ahead and execute. And this could take a little time, so I will pause the video. Actually, that didn't take long at all, just about 30 seconds in this case. But you can see initializing the database could take longer. It may take longer for you. I've had MySQL on this computer before, so it might have been quicker for me than it will be for you. And when we're done, we can hit finish. And then we'll say next. It wants to configure the router, and we're not gonna do anything there. We'll just say finish for that. And then the samples and examples, we want those installed. And then it asks us for that root password. Again, I use SQL 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. And then we'll run the scripts to generate those. Hit execute. So we really didn't change much of anything as we went through these configurations. We mostly just took the defaults. If we want to, we can copy the log of everything we did to our clipboard. It's going to start MySQL Workbench after setup, and it's going to also start the shell. We'll go ahead and let it do that. So there's the shell if we want to type commands, and here's MySQL Workbench, and we have a local instance running on our computer of MySQL. If I click on that, it'll ask me for my root password. And if I want to, I can save the password in Vault, which means I won't have to type it all the time, but I'm going to leave that unchecked for now. And over here, we can see we have some databases installed. We have the Sakilla Workday database. It's got a sample database for an application, I think like for a video store, where it has customers, it has films and actors, an inventory of probably what DVDs they have in stock. So that's one of the sample databases that gets installed. There's also this world database that has tables with cities and then tables with countries, and you can generate, and we'll see some of that later on. So those are the two databases, sample databases. The sys database is the database that the system uses to keep track of everything about your database server. And this isn't a database management course, so we are going to stay away from that, and we are not going to touch it. And If you can see that, then you're configured and ready to go for the next videos.